I had my own brother thrown out of the family for something he never did, and I'd do it again. Can you imagine a moment so gut-wrenching, so utterly unfair, that it makes you question everything you thought you knew about family? Because I lived it. I woke up one morning to find out my parents had been completely wiped out, their retirement gone, and the architect of their ruin was standing right there, accusing my innocent brother. My phone screamed at me at 6 a.m. It was my mom, Aitana, and her name lit up the screen like a warning. The moment I answered, I knew something was horribly wrong. Her voice was shaking so bad, a ragged whisper I could barely understand. "Someone stole the retirement fund," she choked out. "Every penny your father and I saved gone." My stomach dropped. I sat bolt upright in bed, trying to make sense of her words. 30 years of saving. Their entire future just vanished? "Mom, slow down," I urged. "What do you mean, stolen?" But she was already dissolving into sobs. There was no getting more information out of her. So I just told her I was on my way and threw on the first clothes I could grab. That 20-minute drive felt like an eternity. My mind raced, trying to grasp how this could even happen. My parents weren't careless. They had all the passwords, all the security questions, everything you're supposed to do. How could it just disappear? When I pulled into their driveway, it was a graveyard of cars. 6 of them already lined up. The whole family was there before me. I walked through the front door, and the living room felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been delivered. My brother, Chadwick, was hunched in a corner, head down, like he was trying to shrink into the couch. He looked smaller. My uncle Dominic, though he was pacing like a caged tiger in front of the fireplace, his face red, hands flying as he ranted. Dominic was always the loudest, but today he was a storm. My mom sat next to my dad on the love seat, dabbing her eyes with a tissue that was already falling apart. Everyone else just stood around, frozen, waiting for someone to tell them what to do next. Then Dominic stopped pacing, pointed at no one in particular, and the accusation hung heavy in the air. "It had to be someone with access to the account," he practically roared. "And we all know Chadwick's been struggling with money." The room went dead silent, that thick, suffocating quiet where everyone's thinking the same thing, but no one dares to speak it. My eyes locked on Chadwick. He finally lifted his head, and I saw pure terror in his eyes. Chadwick had made some bad choices in his 20s, sure. Got into debt, borrowed from our parents a few times. But that was years ago. He'd turned his life around, steady job, his own place. The idea that he would steal from our parents, it just felt wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. But I couldn't explain why yet. Chadwick looked at me, his eyes wide and desperate. "I didn't take anything," he whispered, his voice cracking on the last word. "You have to believe me." No one said a word. My mom wouldn't even look at him. My dad just stared at the floor, like it held the answers. Dominic crossed his arms, shaking his head, already convinced. The silence was crushing, heavier than anything I'd felt in a long time. "How much are we talking about?" I finally broke in because someone had to ask real questions instead of just throwing blame. My mother's voice was barely audible. "Everything, Harry. The retirement account, the savings, even the emergency fund. Over $200,000. All of it moved out over the past 3 months. 3 months. That hit me hard. This wasn't some impulsive act. This was slow, careful, planned. Someone who knew how to avoid getting caught too fast. That wasn't Chadwick. Not at all. If he was desperate enough, he'd have grabbed it all at once and dealt with the fallout later. This felt different. It felt strategic. I pulled out my phone. Years ago, I'd been added to the family accounts as a backup. Smart, right? At the time, it seemed like a boring formality. Now it was a lifeline. I could see everything. I scrolled through the transfer records, every single one. The amounts varied, a few hundred, then several thousand. But they all came from the same place. The device ID was right there in the security log. I recognized it instantly. I'd helped set it up myself. The transfers all came from the family computer, I said out loud, the words hanging in the tense air. Everyone in the room turned to me, the one in Dominic's office at the family business. For a fleeting second, a tiny flicker of something darted across Dominic's face. Pure, raw panic. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual confident mask. "That computer's been there for 10 years, he snapped too quickly. "Anyone in the family could have used it." I had just kept looking at the records on my phone. The device ID. The office Dominic kept locked. The computer 10 feet from his desk. The same computer he used every single day to run the business. I didn't say anything else right then, but I made a mental note. How fast he was to blame Chadwick and how hard he was working to make sure no one looked anywhere else. The moment I'd even hinted at Dominic's office, he shut me down. "You're just protecting your little brother, like you always do," he said, his voice dripping with that reasonable, condescending tone that made me sound crazy. "You can't see the truth because you're too close." I looked around the room, desperate for anyone, to back me up, but my own mother was nodding along with him. Like everything he said made perfect sense. So I swallowed my anger. I kept my mouth shut, but I started digging. Dominic had been the one pushing hardest to blame Chadwick from day one. That felt wrong. Deeply wrong. I copied everything I could find on my phone. Every record, every detail. The next family meeting was in 4 days. I planned to be ready. Those 4 days felt like the longest of my life. I spent most of them on the phone, trying to get anyone in my family to listen. I started with my aunt, my mom's sister, thinking maybe she'd be outside Dominic's direct influence. The second I mentioned his office computer, she cut me off. "Dominic already explained everything," she sighed, sounding so tired, like I was a stubborn child. "Why are you still defending Chadwick?" I tried to explain about the device ID, how everything was linked to that one computer. She wasn't interested. She told me Dominic had called her the day before, walked her through the whole situation. According to him, Chadwick had been using the office computer whenever he visited the business, which was a total lie. Chadwick hadn't set foot in that building in over a year, but my aunt believed it because Dominic said it, and that was apparently enough. I called 3 more relatives that day. Same response every single time. My uncle on my dad's side felt bad for me, saying I was clearly struggling to accept the truth about my own brother. My cousin, 2 towns over, told me Dominic had warned her I might call, that I'd probably try to make up stories to protect Chadwick. That word, warned, stuck with me. Dominic wasn't just defending himself. He was actively working to shut me down before I could even open my mouth. Every conversation ended the same way. "Let it go, Harry. Stop making things worse for the family." By the end of the second day, I felt like I was screaming into a wall that kept getting thicker. The family meeting was still 2 days away, and Dominic had already won the argument without me even being in the room. I drove to my parents' house on the 3rd day. I had to see my mom face to face. Maybe if I could sit down with her, show her what I found, she'd at least consider that something wasn't right. But when I got there, the house was full of people again. Dominic was holding court in the kitchen, playing the concerned family member, lamenting how hard this was on everyone. My stomach churned. That's when my cousin Vicente appeared at my side. He was younger than me, usually quiet, always avoided family drama. But he grabbed my elbow and pulled me toward the back hallway where no one else could hear. "I believe you're on to something," he whispered, his eyes darting toward the kitchen like he feared being caught. "But Dominic's been telling everyone you're in denial. He says you can't accept that Chadwick did this because you two have always been close." A tiny spark of hope flickered inside me for the first time in days. At least one person saw through the act. "Vicente," I whispered back. The transfers all came from his computer, the one in his locked office. How is nobody asking questions about that? Vicente shook his head, because he has an answer for everything. He told people Chadwick used to come by the office sometimes, that he must have done it when no one was watching. And everyone believes him. Because he's Dominic. He's been running the family business for 20 years. People trust him. I wanted to punch a wall. Dominic had spent decades building up this reputation as the reliable one, the responsible one, the guy who always had the family's best interests at heart. And now, he was using all that trust to destroy my brother's life. Vicente squeezed my arm, his eyes serious. Be careful, Harry. I don't know what's really going on here, but Dominic is 3 steps ahead of you. Whatever you're planning, make sure you have proof that can't be denied. Then he walked away, rejoining the group in the kitchen like we'd never spoken. I stood in that hallway, trying to figure out my next move. Vicente was right. Device ID alone wasn't enough. Dominic already had his story. I needed something that couldn't be twisted, couldn't be denied. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, going through those bank records again, line by line, looking for anything I missed. I pulled up the timestamps on each transfer, comparing them to what I knew of Chadwick's schedule. My brother worked a regular job, set hours, and I knew he'd been at work during some of those transfer times. But then I looked closer. Something felt off. The timestamps had been changed. I could see it in the metadata, in the small details most people wouldn't know to look for. Someone had gone into the records and altered the times, made it look like the transfers happened when Chadwick was at our parents' house for dinner or visiting on a weekend. The original times were different. They were during business hours, when Chadwick was across town at his job. Someone had deliberately, meticulously made my brother look guilty by changing the evidence after the fact. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen for a long time. This wasn't just about stealing money anymore. This was about framing someone for a crime they didn't commit. And the only person who had access to those records, who could have made those changes, was the same person who controlled the family business. And that locked office. Dominic wasn't just a thief. He was setting up my brother to take the fall for everything. The next morning, I drove back to my parents' house, laptop in hand. I had screenshots of everything. The original timestamps, the altered ones, laid out side by side. Undeniable. I found my mom, Aitana, in the kitchen making coffee. She looked so tired, more tired than I'd seen her since my grandfather passed away. The stress of the past week was crushing her. Part of me felt awful for adding to her burden. But I couldn't let Chadwick go down for something he didn't do. Mom, I need to show you something, I said, placing the laptop on the counter. Just 5 minutes, please. She turned to me, her expression already closed off. Harry, I don't want to do this again. I know, I said, my voice urgent. But this is important. Someone changed the records to make Chadwick look guilty. The timestamps were altered after the transfers happened. I can prove it. I started to turn the laptop toward her, but she held up her hand. Dominic already told us you'd try this, she said, her voice so sad it almost broke me. He said you'd fabricate evidence to protect your brother. He said you wouldn't be able to help yourself because you've always taken care of Chadwick, even when he didn't deserve it. The floor dropped out from under me. My own mother, looking at me like I was the problem, like I was the one hurting the family by refusing to accept the obvious truth. Mom, I didn't fabricate anything. These are real records. The metadata doesn't lie. She just shook her head, turning back to her coffee. I can't do this, Harry. I can't keep going back and forth while your father and I are trying to figure out how to survive without our retirement. Dominic has been helping us. He's been there for us. And all you've done is make accusations and cause more pain. I stood there, laptop in my hands, feeling utterly defeated. Dominic had gotten to everyone before me. He'd poisoned the well so thoroughly that anything I said would just confirm his twisted story about me being in denial. I drove home in silence, a heavy knot in my chest, trying to figure out what to do next. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed. A text from Chadwick. My heart sank even lower than I thought possible. "They're talking about pressing charges," it read, "against me, for something I didn't do." I called him immediately. He picked up on the first ring, and I could hear the sheer terror in his simple hello. "Who told you that?" I demanded. "Dad called me an hour ago. He said Dominic convinced him that pressing charges is the only way to get the money back. They think if they take me to court, I'll crack and tell them where I hid everything." His voice was shaking, dissolving into a desperate plea. "Harry, I don't have their money. I never touched it, but nobody believes me except you." I gripped my phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Dominic wasn't just going to let Chadwick take the blame. He was going to send my brother to prison to cover up his own crime. And if I didn't stop him, it was going to work. Dominic had poisoned everyone against me, turning my own family into witnesses for his defense instead of mine. He knew exactly what I'd find in those records, which meant he'd already built his walls before I could even knock them down. Vicente was the only one who would listen, and even he was scared to speak up. But I noticed something else in those altered timestamps that Dominic had missed. The changes came from the same device that made the original transfers. The digital fingerprints were identical, and I could prove it if I had the right software and 10 minutes alone with his computer. The family business had a board meeting scheduled for Friday morning at 10 a.m. Everyone would be in the conference room. Everyone except me, since Dominic had already convinced them I shouldn't be involved in sensitive family matters until the situation with Chadwick was resolved. I called Vicente that night. I told him what I needed. At first, he was quiet, weighing the risks. "You want me to keep Dominic busy while you break into his office?" he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm not breaking in," I clarified. "The office is in a building my family owns. I have every right to be there." Vicente laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Try telling that to Dominic when he catches you going through his computer." I waited. I could hear him breathing, both of us scared. Then he said, "Fine, I'll do it. But you better find something good in there, Harry. Because if you don't, we're both going to look like idiots. And Chadwick is still going to prison." I told him I understood the stakes. We made a plan. Vicente would show up to the board meeting a few minutes early, corner Dominic with questions about the budget. He figured he could keep him talking for at least 15 minutes, maybe longer if he played dumb. That would give me enough time. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. I kept running through every single thing that could go wrong, all the ways this could blow up in my face, making things even worse for Chadwick. But then I pictured my brother, alone in his apartment, waiting to find out if his own family was going to send him to prison for a crime he didn't commit. That thought, that was enough to push me forward, no matter how scared I was. Friday morning came too fast, and not fast enough, all at once. I parked my car 2 blocks away from the family business, so no one would see it. The building was an old office complex, one my father and Dominic had started together almost 25 years ago. Back when they were young, full of dreams, believing they could build something that would last for generations. Now, it was just another piece of evidence in my uncle's betrayal. I watched from across the street as people arrived. My father's car first, then other board members. Dominic showed up at 9:45 a.m., right on schedule, in the fancy car he'd bought last year. At the time, I'd just assumed he got a good deal. Now, I wondered how much of my parents' retirement fund was sitting in that garage. Vicente texted me at 9:58. "Going in now. He's heading for the conference room. You have 15 minutes, maybe 20 if I can stretch it." I took a deep breath and walked across the street like I belonged there, which technically I did. The back entrance was around the side, past the dumpsters. I'd used it 100 times working college summers. The code hadn't changed in over a decade. 4721. My mother's birthday. My father's old password. The hallway was empty. I could hear muffled voices from the conference room, far away. Dominic's office was on the second floor, up the back stairs to the left. I moved quickly, but tried not to run. Running would look suspicious. The door to his office was closed, not locked. I turned the handle, pushed it open, half expecting an alarm, a shout. Nothing. The room was dark, quiet, morning light striping Dominic's big wooden desk. I closed the door behind me and went straight for the computer. The screen was dark. I moved the mouse. It lit up. No password screen. No security prompt. Just Dominic's desktop, all his files and folders, sitting there waiting. His arrogance had actually worked in my favor. He never thought anyone would check. He'd spent so much time convincing everyone there was nothing to check. Why bother locking your computer when you've already made sure no one suspects you of anything? I sat in his chair and started looking. Most were normal business files. Invoices, contracts, emails. But one folder, tucked away in a corner of the screen, stood out. A string of random numbers and letters. The kind of thing that would look like a system file to anyone who didn't know what they were looking for. I clicked it open. My breath caught. The original transfer records. All there. Dates, amounts, account numbers. But these weren't the records I'd seen before. These were the real ones. The ones that hadn't been altered to frame my brother. And they showed exactly where the money had gone. An offshore account. With Dominic's name on it. He'd been siphoning money from my parents for months. Little bits at a time, so no one would notice until it was too late. The amounts matched, down to the last penny. Over $200,000 of my parents' retirement, sitting in an account my uncle controlled. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drag him out of that conference room and make him explain. But I knew that wouldn't work. I needed proof. Undeniable evidence. I pulled a flash drive from my pocket, plugged it in. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. The files were big. The transfer felt like it took forever. Each second stretched. 70%, 80%, 90%. I kept glancing at the door, expecting it to fly open. Then I heard footsteps. Heavy footsteps. Moving fast. Getting closer. My heart pounded in my ears. The progress bar hit 95%. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I yanked the flash drive out, shoved it in my pocket, just as Dominic's voice boomed through the door. Who left my office unlocked? He sounded annoyed, not suspicious. Like it was just another minor inconvenience in his perfect day. I heard the doorknob start to turn. I moved faster than I'd ever moved, crossing the room in 3 steps, bursting through the back door that led to the emergency stairs. The door clicked shut behind me just as Dominic walked into his office. I stood on the landing, back pressed against the wall, trying to control my breathing. My legs felt like water. The flash drive in my pocket felt like it weighed 100 pounds. For a long moment, I just listened to Dominic moving around in his office. Then I heard him mutter something I couldn't make out, and his footsteps moved away from the back door, toward the front of the room. I didn't wait. I flew down those stairs as fast as I could without making a sound. And I didn't stop until I was back in my car, 2 blocks away. My hands were still shaking when I drove home. I had everything I needed to save my brother and destroy my uncle. The question now was how to use it, without giving Dominic another chance to spin the story in his favor. I sat in my car, staring at the flash drive. Dominic had spent weeks making me look unstable. If I just showed up with this, he'd claim I planted everything. I needed witnesses. Witnesses who couldn't be dismissed. I pulled out my phone and called Vicente. "I have it all," I said when he picked up. "But I need this to happen somewhere Dominic can control." Vicente was quiet for a moment. "Where?" he asked. Then it hit me. The answer was obvious. My parents' anniversary dinner. Saturday. The whole family would be there. Dominic would be there, confident, untouchable. He had no idea I was about to return the favor for every lie he told about my brother. Saturday came faster than I expected. I spent most of the day going over my plan, again and again, until every detail was memorized. The flash drive sat in my pocket, a small, heavy weight, a constant reminder of what was at stake. I got to my parents' house an hour before dinner. I was surprised by how nice everything looked. My mom had set up the dining room with a good tablecloth, the one only for special occasions. Flowers, candles everywhere, casting this warm, forgiving glow. For a moment, I almost forgot why I was really there. Almost. The dinner started beautifully. My father helping my mother into her chair, like they were on a first date. They looked happy for the first time in weeks. Watching them smile, my chest felt tight. I knew what I was about to do might ruin this night forever. But then I thought about Chadwick, and the tightness turned into something harder. The other guests arrived. Aunts, uncles, cousins. Everyone hugged my parents, said the usual things. You two are an inspiration. Here's to many more years. I stood near the back, watching. And then Dominic walked in. Expensive suit, expensive wine bottle for my mother. For the happy couple, he beamed. My mother actually teared up. I wanted to throw up. Vicente caught my eye a small nod. He knew. He was the only one. I nodded back, trying to keep my face calm, even though my heart was hammering. The dinner was catered, which surprised me. My mom usually cooked everything herself for family events. But after everything, I guess she just didn't have the energy. The food was good. Chicken, vegetables, potatoes. Everyone sat around the big table, talking, laughing, like it was just another family gathering. I kept looking at the empty chair at the end of the table. Chadwick's chair. I'd asked my mom why he wasn't there. She'd gotten that uncomfortable look. It's too uncomfortable right now, Harry. Until this is resolved, it's better if he stays away. The way she said it, like Chadwick was some problem to be dealt with, not her own son. It made me so angry I had to walk away. So there we were, a big, happy family celebration. And no one would even talk about the fact that my brother was alone, somewhere, wondering if he was going to prison for something he didn't do. Dominic, meanwhile, sat at the head of the table, telling stories, making everyone laugh. My parents beamed at him, like he was a savior. About halfway through the meal, Dominic stood up, tapped his wine glass. The room quieted, all eyes on him. He held up his glass, cleared his throat. I'd like to make a toast, he announced, his voice smooth, confident. To family, to trust, to standing together when times get hard. He paused, looked directly at me, a challenge in his eyes. This family has been through a lot lately, he continued, still staring at me. But we're strong. We stick together, and we don't let anything tear us apart. Everyone raised their glasses. My mother squeezed Dominic's hand. I took a small sip of my wine, set it down. My hands were steady. My mind was racing. This was it, the moment. I pushed my chair back. The scraping sound echoed. I have something to share, I said. My voice came out stronger than I expected. About the missing money. The mood in the room changed instantly. A cold wind. My mother's face fell. My father looked at his plate. Cousins exchanged uncomfortable glances. Dominic's smile didn't waver. If anything, it widened. He set his glass down, looked at me with that blend of pity and disappointment. Harry, he said, his voice gentle. Too gentle. We've been over this. Let's not ruin your parents' evening with more conspiracy theories. A few people nodded. Someone whispered. My mother reached across the table. Please, Harry, she pleaded quietly. Not tonight. This is supposed to be a happy occasion. I looked at her, at the raw pleading in her eyes. For a second, I almost sat back down. Every face looked at me like I was the problem. The room felt smaller. The weight of their judgment pressed down. Dominic was still smiling, still so confident he'd won. He thought I'd back down, mumble an apology, let him keep running his story. But then I thought about Chadwick, alone, waiting. I thought about the flash drive in my pocket, all that proof. I thought about how Dominic had looked my father in the eye and lied, and how he'd keep lying until someone stopped him. I didn't sit down. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out the flash drive, held it up for everyone to see. "I'm not asking anyone to believe me," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could, even though my heart was trying to beat its way out of my chest. "I'm asking you to look at the evidence that Dominic didn't want you to see." The room went absolutely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Dominic's smile finally cracked. Just a little. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw fear in his eyes. I pulled my laptop from my bag, set it on the table. My hands, surprisingly, were steady. The flash drive clicked into the USB port. I opened the files, turned the screen. Bank records filled the display. Row after row of transfers. Dates, amounts, account numbers. The whole story. "These are the original records from Dominic's computer," I announced. "The ones that show where the money really went." My mother leaned forward, her eyes scanning the numbers. The offshore account, the altered timestamps, and right there, at the bottom of each transfer, clear as day, Dominic's digital signature. I scrolled slowly, pointing. "This is the account where all the money went. Over $200,000, transferred in small amounts over 3 months. And this signature right here, this digital code, it can only come from one person. The person who set up the account in the first place." The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. My aunts and uncles stared, mouths agape. My father was pale, gripping the table. And Dominic, for the first time, he looked like a man who just realized he wasn't as smart as he thought he was. But he recovered. Fast. He slammed his hand down, dishes rattling. "Those are fabricated," he roared, an edge to his voice I'd never heard. "Harry's been trying to frame me since the beginning. I told all of you this would happen. I warned you he would make up evidence to protect his brother. And here he is, doing exactly what I said he would do." He looked around, desperate for someone to nod along. No one did. They just stared at the screen, bewildered. My mother was still leaning forward. I watched her face change as she looked at the account information, really looked at it, without Dominic's voice in her ear. Her forehead wrinkled. She brought a hand to her mouth. Then she turned to Dominic, her voice small, confused. "That's your account number, Dominic," she said. The words hung heavy. "I recognize it from when you helped us set up the business. You wrote it down for me on that little notepad I keep in the kitchen. I still have it somewhere." Dominic's face cycled through surprise, anger, fear, then almost panic. He turned from my mother to my father, switching tactics. "You're really going to believe this?" he pleaded, now sounding hurt. "After everything I've done for this family? After 20 years of building this business together, of being there for every birthday and holiday, of helping out whenever anyone needed anything? You're going to throw all that away because Harry copied some files onto a flash drive?" My father didn't answer. He just stared at the screen, then Dominic, then the screen again. His face was unreadable. I could see the pain, but also a growing anger. The silence stretched, agonizing. I worried Dominic's words had worked, that my father would choose loyalty over truth. But then Vicente pushed his chair back, stood up. Everyone turned to him. My cousin wasn't loud. He usually stayed out of arguments, but his hands were shaking slightly and his voice was steady. "I was with Harry when he found these files," Vicente said, looking straight at Dominic. "More courage than I'd ever seen from him. On your computer, in your office, at the family business, during the board meeting on Friday." A murmur went through the room. Dominic's eyes went wide. He took a small step back. Vicente kept going, voice strengthening. "I kept you busy in the conference room while Harry went upstairs. He didn't plan anything. He didn't fabricate anything. He just copied the files that were already there. The ones you thought nobody would ever look for because you'd convinced everyone that Chadwick was guilty." The room exploded. Everyone talking at once, questions, demands. My aunt was saying she always thought Dominic spent too much on things he couldn't afford. My uncle kept repeating, "I can't believe this." Dominic just stood there, mouth opening and closing, trying to find words. I watched him crumble, a weird mix of satisfaction and sadness. Part of me had hoped I was wrong, but there it was, undeniable. Dominic was caught, and everyone knew it. My mother turned to him, her expression hardening from confusion to something much colder. "You came to our house the day after we found out," she said slowly. "You sat in our living room and pointed at Chadwick. You told us he must have done it because he needed money. You made us believe our own son was a thief." Her voice cracked on thief. My father took her hand. "All this time," she continued, "while we were talking about pressing charges against our own child, you knew exactly where that money was because you were the one who took it." Dominic held up his hands. "Listen to me. Don't you dare say my name like we're still family." My mother's voice rose, louder than I'd ever heard it. "You are going to let my son go to prison for something you did. What kind of person does that?" I stood there watching. It felt like a dream. All those days of being told I was crazy, of being shut down, of watching my brother get pushed out. It was all worth it for this moment. The truth, out in the open. My father stood up. The room went quiet again. He was a big man. When he moved, people paid attention. He walked around the table until he was right in front of Dominic. The two brothers faced each other. 20 years of history, business meetings, family dinners, holidays, all the trust my father had placed in this man. Dominic's face went from angry to desperate. He searched for magic words. There were none, just the truth, blazing on my laptop screen. My father's voice was quiet, but it carried like thunder. "I want to hear you say it. I want to hear you admit what you did." Dominic grabbed his jacket, headed for the door. "I don't have to listen to this," he threw over his shoulder, trying to sound confident. It came out shaky. "When you all come to your senses, you know where to find me." But before he could reach the front door, my father moved, blocking his path. They stood face to face, without the masks. 20 years of pretense gone. My father spoke low and hard. "You told me my own son was a thief," he said, each word a punch. "You looked me in the eye and lied." Dominic stood there for a moment, still trying to keep up the act. But then something shifted in his face. The smooth confidence melted away. What was left was ugly raw and honest. His shoulders dropped. His jaw tightened. His voice wasn't smooth anymore. It was bitter, angry, full of something that sounded like hate. "I built that business," Dominic spat, jabbing a finger toward my father's chest. "I made this family what it is. 20 years I spent turning that little company into something real, something that actually made money, something that put food on all of your tables. And you think I was going to let it all go to waste on your retirement?" The words hung in the air like poison. My father's face changed as he realized what his brother was really saying. This wasn't just about stolen money. It was about decades of festering resentment. Dominic feeling he deserved more. All those fake smiles at family dinners. All that hidden hate. My mother stepped forward, her face pale, eyes steady. Small but clear. "You stole from us," she whispered. No anger, just deep, sad grief. "And you were going to let Chadwick go to prison for it." She said his name like it hurt. I thought about all those weeks she'd refused to look at Chadwick, believed the worst. All that pain, all that broken trust, all because of this man. Dominic turned to face her. No apology, no guilt, just cold calculation. Still trying to talk his way out. "Chadwick's weak," he said, flat, matter of fact. "He would have survived prison. He's young. He would have gotten out eventually. But if people found out about the account, if they saw where the money really went, the business would collapse. Everyone would lose everything." He looked around the room. And for a second, I thought I saw genuine belief in his eyes. He actually thought what he was saying made sense. That sending my brother to prison was the reasonable choice. The smart choice. The one that protected the family better than telling the truth ever could. "I was trying to save us," Dominic insisted, voice growing louder. "All of us. The business, the jobs, everything we built. If that money came to light, investors would run. Clients would leave. The whole thing would fall apart, and everyone in this room would have lost their income, their security, everything. I made a hard choice. I did what had to be done." The silence that followed was thick. People struggled to process it. Dominic was admitting everything, but trying to spin himself as the hero. Stealing $200,000, framing his nephew, all smart business. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped forward, next to my father, facing Dominic head-on. My hands were shaking a little, but my voice was steady. "You didn't do this to protect the family," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "You did it because you were scared of getting caught." Dominic's mouth opened. I kept going. "You've been skimming from the business for years, haven't you? The fancy car, the expensive suits, all those vacations you took that nobody else could afford. That money had to come from somewhere. And when the amounts got big enough that someone might notice, you panicked. You needed a way to cover your tracks. And Chadwick was the easiest target because you'd already spent years making everyone think he was irresponsible." The truth landed. My aunt's eyes went wide. My cousin put her hand over her mouth. Even Vicente looked shocked. Dominic's face went red, a pulsing vein in his forehead. He looked around at all those faces that had trusted him, that had nodded along with his lies, that had turned against Chadwick on his word. And now those same faces were looking at him like they didn't even know who he was. "You don't understand," he said, his voice losing all its power. Desperate. Small. "None of you understand what it takes to keep something like this running. The pressure, the responsibility, everyone depending on you. I gave everything to this family. Everything. And this is how you repay me." My father stood like a wall, arms crossed, face like stone. This wasn't just anger. This was the look of a man who watched everything he believed about his own brother turn to ash. "You gave everything," my father repeated slowly, his voice so cold it made me shiver. "You took our retirement. You tried to destroy our son. You lied to our faces for months while we cried ourselves to sleep, wondering how we were going to survive. And you call that giving." Dominic bumped into the dining table. Dishes rattled. A wine glass tipped, spilling red across the white tablecloth like blood. He looked around one last time, searching for anyone still on his side. There was no one. Every face had closed against him. "This isn't fair," Dominic whimpered. "I'm your brother. We built that company together. You can't just throw away everything we have over some money." My mother made a sound, almost a laugh, but with no humor. "Some money," she repeated. "Our entire future. Our retirement. 30 years of saving every penny so we wouldn't have to worry when we got old. You call that some money?" She shook her head. Her eyes, when they met Dominic's, held nothing but exhaustion and disgust. "I trusted you. I defended you to Harry. I chose to believe you over my own son, over my own instincts, because I thought I knew who you were. I thought you were family." That word, family, it hit Dominic harder than anything else. He flinched, and for a second I saw something real. Regret. Shame. The pain of being seen for what he truly was. Then it was gone, replaced by that hard, angry look. He straightened his jacket, lifted his chin, trying to cling to dignity. "Fine," he said, his voice flat cold. "If that's how you want it. But don't come crying to me when the business falls apart. Don't call me when you realize you need my help. I'm done saving people who don't appreciate what I've done for them." He turned toward the door, trying to walk out on his own terms. But my father was still in the way. He didn't move. Instead, he reached over and opened the front door. A rush of cool evening air. The candles flickered. Then my father pointed to the street outside. His voice was steady. "Final. Get out," he said, "and don't come back." Dominic stood there, staring, like he couldn't believe it, like he expected my father to change his mind, to say it was all okay. But my father just kept pointing. At the open door, at the darkness waiting outside, at the end of everything Dominic thought he could count on. Finally, after what felt like forever, Dominic walked through it. His footsteps echoed on the porch, then faded as he made his way toward his fancy car. No one spoke until we heard the engine start, headlights sweep across the windows, and he drove away. Then my mother sank heavily into the nearest chair, burying her face in her hands. My father closed the door, leaned against it, like he needed something solid to hold him up. The anniversary dinner was ruined, the tablecloth stained, candles burned down, half the food cold. But as I looked around at my family, at all the people who had finally seen what I'd been trying to show them for weeks, I felt something loosen in my chest. Something that had been tight for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe normally. Vicente came over, put a hand on my shoulder. My mother looked up, tears streaming. "Call your brother," she whispered, her voice breaking. Tell him we're so sorry." And as I reached for my phone, ready to give Chadwick the news that would change everything, a profound thought settled over me. The truth might shatter worlds, but lies will always destroy them first. Have you ever had to fight for the truth against your own family, even when it felt like everyone was against you? Or maybe you've been in Chadwick's shoes, accused of something you didn't do? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. What would you have done in my place?